Hey everyone, ever struggled with selecting the right radio buttons in your Selenium script? You know those tiny circles on the forms that refuse to click properly? Well, today I'm going to show you exactly how to handle radio buttons like a pro and including checking if they are displayed, enabled, or already selected, and in even smarter ways to loop through them on Python. In the end of this video, your script will never get stuck on radio buttons. So follow throughout, and this is the page that I have created for practicing on checkboxes and radio buttons. So make sure you come here, you try to explore this page more. And I have also specified a sample Selenium code, which would help you to click on this button. All right, so you can play around on this page as well. And to add on, here are the list of topics that we are going to talk in this video. So let's first talk about what is a radio button. A radio button in general is a button which you can interact with and is defaulted to only one in a group. So if there are 10 radio buttons, you can only select one, whereas a checkbox can be selected multiple, right? So in Selenium, an ideal way is first you check the radio button if it is selected or not. Then you want to make sure whether it is clickable or not. You can also go for whether it is displayed or not. Also grab its value using get attribute and know which option is present. And always loop through the group and check whether the properties that you are trying to select is actually displayed in your application, so your application script doesn't throw an error, right? So let's get started with my first test on a radio button. So this is a particular radio button where I had created 3 options and mail is selected by default. Let's inspect this first. It says label for mail, and this is my radio button, right? So I am going to copy this ID. I have copied it, and I'm going to go to my PyCharm again, and I'll use the same property value of gender male. It's a pretty straightforward script, right? But the catch here is this might not execute. What I'm doing here is I'm just trying to click on this particular radio button using the ID. Will it execute? Let's run this. So it opened here. Let's go back. It's not, right? It says element not interactable exception. So if you think that since it is already defaulted to male, that's the reason it's not selecting, let's try and do it for the female as well. So it says input type radio, and here is the ID. So I'll change this to female. Now again, re-execute this. Executed. Let's head back to my script. It again says element not interactable. Whether it was the female ID, yes, it was the female ID that I was trying to click here, but it's not interactable. Now, what happens in most of the cases or in the modern web UI, many checkboxes are visually replaced by styled element like label or spam. I mean, those are again tag, and then the actual input often has a style of display as none or opacity of 0. Selenium click method only works with directly visible or interactable elements. A workaround to this is so you can use JavaScript to click, which directly triggers the click event in the browser rather than just clicking on this particular element, right? So understand it in this way. So this is a UI. Now this is my UI. I'll inspect this. So I don't see a corresponding event attached to it. There is no event like what happens on click, but by default, there are events which are already running for these particular elements, right? So those are implicit. How you can trigger it? You can use JavaScript to trigger those events directly rather than clicking on this particular radio button. So to do that, you just have to say here, let me first remove or comment this line, and my code would be again driver dot. So for JavaScript, you have to always write execute script. Execute script. What do you want to do? Arguments dot click. Arguments of 0. It's list arguments of 0 dot click, and I'll say gender male, right? Because I'm storing it as gender male, right? So let me change this also. I'll name it as male. Why is this throwing an error? So this is supposed to be in double quotes. All right. So this is my script. Arguments dot click and this male. So this will directly trigger your JavaScript. So this doesn't check whether it is displayed or enabled or those things, right? Enable by default it will check, but if there is a click command attached to this particular element, it will go and click that. Let's run this. So this time it will go and click here and it doesn't fail, right? Correct? Now, however, this is an easier option, or this is a short method that this is going to run, but this is not advisable to use JavaScript to trigger the methods implicitly. Rather, what we are going to do is we are going to use the label property of this particular radio button to click on the particular radio button. How we are going to do is we'll say we'll go to my application, we'll right click here, inspect. You see there is a label for gender male, right? Now we are going to use this property. So we are going to say driver dot find elements, find element, and we'll say by, let's say, CSS selector itself, right? Instead of the value, I'll just paste it whatever I have copied. So this is what, this is the for property. So we are going to put it, and this is for what? This is for a label, and give a square bracket, again gender male again and square bracket. So we'll replace this double quotes to single quotes. All right, now instead of this, I'm going to click on female, right? So this was also, this is coming from my application again, right? Let's run this if this works or not. So it goes here, clicks here on the female. Clear? So there are three ways. The first and the easiest way is to use dot click. If this doesn't work, you have to click on the label instead of the particular radio button or checkboxes, right? Now, the other way around is to use the execute script, but I don't advise, or this is not advisable at all, to use it on the first go, because you already have a defined way or an element which is helping you to point to that particular web element you are targeting. All right. Now, the next thing that we can check here is this element, the gender male that we just clicked, is selected or not. So right now, by default, when the page loads, that element will be selected, right? And how do you identify that? If you go to your HTML, inspect this. So it says there is a input with the radio ID gender male, value is male, and checked is the property attached to it. Whereas in the next one you don't see that, right? So checked means by default it will be checked. Now moving back, so this would return you either true or false. Now I'm not running this now. I'll take a few more examples and I'll run it in one go. So what we are going to do here is, if at all it is not selected, then only we are going to select it. How we are going to do that? So if not gender underscore male dot is selected. So if gender male is selected and there is a negation to the condition. So if it is not selected, then only we are going to click on this male button. But for clicking on this mail button, how we are going to do? We are not going to use this particular click method. Instead, I'm going to say use this, right? Gender, or let's do it this way. So here, what I'll do is I'll still keep this example. So what I'm doing here is I'm coming here and I'm clicking on the gender female. So what this will do is this will click on the female checkbox. Then we'll check. So this should return me false, and then it would again click on the male button, right? So let's run this now. You see, so male is selected right now. And if we read the console, is male selected? It says false. Since it was false here, so it went ahead and click on the male button. So let's comment these and we move on to the next one. So it says looping through a group of radio buttons. So by default, if you check on this page, a radio button is always followed in a group. Okay. Group as in there will be a group of radio buttons which you have to click, right? And how do you understand which group it belongs to? You'll have to use the name attribute. So you see the name is gender. This is also gender and gender. So this is a group of radio button with the attribute name as gender, and you can only select one of these three, right? Because it's in a group. All right. So let's head back to my PyCharm. How do we read it? So I am doing a find elements here, right? So do a find elements by name property gender. So what happens here is I come here, wherever the name is gender, I'm going to pull that. Now I'll get a list of radio buttons, right? Now the next thing that I'm doing here is, if that radio button dot value is female, I'm just going to click on it. So you are doing what? You are just iterating through a list of radio buttons and you are clicking on the radio button wherever you want to click. Alright. And as soon as I click on the female radio button, I don't want to run through the loop again. So I'm breaking my loop here. Straightforward. And then again, if you want, if this doesn't work, replace this with label dot click, right? So again, we are selecting the list of radios, and if that particular radio is selected, I'm just going to print the value of it, like which radio button is already selected in it, right? So by default, the male is selected, so it would print male here. This is also is selected command. You should remember these. Next one is, again, what we are doing here is we are just using the tag name. Okay, so we are just using the tag name and pulling out the labels. So so what happens is, in the UI, you are, whatever you are seeing, male, female, others, they are nothing but labels here. Okay, so using the labels, we are going to click the checkboxes. Sorry, the radio buttons. Okay, so what this will do is, this will pull out everything from all the labels, not just this male, female, and others. Instead, if I just do a control F and do a label here, right? So there are how many labels here? 14 labels it says, right? So all of the labels are pulled in this particular loop or in this variable, and I'll use a loop to check if the label text is others, then only you click on this label. All right. So let me give a wait for say 2 seconds. Okay. All right. So this is also done. Now moving on to the next one. If you have any disabled radio buttons or not, how do you check? So you are going to use a property called is enabled. Okay. So is enabled will return you true if the particular radio button is enabled. If it is disabled, it will return false. Right. So what we are doing here is, in my page, I have a disabled radio button. Okay. Where is this? Here. So this is a disabled radio button. So if you inspect this, so this is a label for radio button, and this is the actual radio button that we are targeting, right? Input type radio, right? And this is the property that makes it disabled. So what we are going to do in my script is, I'm just going to use the ID property of disabled radio, right here, disabled radio. I pasted it here, and I'm just checking whether it is disabled or enabled. Clear? In the next example, what we are going to discuss is, there is something called as lazy load, okay, in the page. So what happens is, the page or the element is only visible when you scroll to that particular element. So let's do an example on this one. Let me do this so you understand the concept here. So when we said lazy load, so this is the label, or this is checkboxes, the radio buttons, which are actually not displayed right now. So it says display is none, right? So only when we scroll to that element, this display will become visible to us. So right now it says none. Now watch this area very carefully. What happens here? Okay. Now I'm just scrolling down, and you see a new line of code is injected here. It says display inline block. Okay. So for everything that was not visible earlier, it is now visible. So now you can select them, right? Now we are going to handle this in our script. So let's first do it this way, that we are just going to send a command to select that particular radio button or the checkboxes. Let's see if that works or not, right? So what I'm doing here is, I have found out the lazy radio, that's the button, and I'm just giving the execute script of click on that particular argument, or rather I can do it this way. So let me first execute this. So it executed. Now let's go to my page. It's here, right? Let's see if the lazy load button was clicked or not, or let me first inspect, right? So I inspected, where is my lazy load? Disabled is here, this is delayed, so this is here. Now what does it say? So it says the style is still display none, right? But if I go here, this particular radio button is already clicked, right? But this doesn't help me to verify whether these particular elements loaded when I came here, or was it kind of disabled, or let's see how to handle this right now. Okay. So what happened here is, let me run through the results. So what happened here is, we got this particular radio gender, right? So we had the gender that we were trying to verify, which is pre-selected. So it returned me an output of male, right? Is the radio button disabled? So we had a check here, right? So if that particular radio button is disabled, it would return me false. So that radio button was disabled, so it returned me false here, right? Now on the lazy load, what happened? When we clicked on the button, it directly injected the JavaScript in the browser. So it didn't go through checking whether that particular element is visible. Those checks have been passed. It just executed the click command. Now a better way to handle this is using the labels, right? If I go here, I'll inspect. Same, the label is for lazy load. So I'm going to copy this, go here, and I'll say driver dot find element, and say by dot CSS selector. And what is it? It is a, what is it? It's a label, and it's for lazy radio. Change this to single quotes. Just dot click, right? Let's comment this. Okay. Now let's re-execute this. What happens this time? It came here, waited for 2 seconds, did its execution, went back to my script, and it failed. Why it failed? It says no such element exception, right? So when we are going through this, we should expect this message to come in my screen, because by the time we are here, those buttons are not yet enabled, right? They are still disabled, or they are still not visible on my page. Only when I scroll until to that element, then only I'll be able to click it. Okay. Now, another take on this is using the JavaScript executor. You can do it. That's also fine, but that doesn't verify the logic behind the field. So to actually follow the workflow, you have to come here. You have to use something called as scroll into view. We had done a hands-on on this particular method also when we were trying to scroll to a particular element, right? So the same thing we are doing here. So we are using the lazy radio, and we are scrolling to that particular element. Then only we are going to click on the radio or the element. And to be on a safe side, you can also add a sleep. However, this is not required. Selenium implicit has a wait time, but I am explicitly setting a 0.5 second sleep, and then you click on that particular radio button. Now, let's take the next example also, and I'll run it in one go. Okay, so I'll comment these, right? Even maybe this is required. Okay, so from here, now what we are going to do is, whenever you are working along with forms, right? So radios would mostly be a part of a form. So before submitting, whenever you are using it on a form, whenever you are submitting it, so use the isSelect command to kind of validate whatever you have selected before the form. So before submitting the form, you can check, you can have a check using the loops that we had seen here. This is just like a combined example. So we had seen this, we were getting a list of radio buttons. In that radio buttons, we were trying to pull out which radio button is selected. And this is more or less like printing in the log that I have selected this particular radio button before submit. So what happens is, if you click on a radio button and down the line in your workflow, towards the end, suppose that radio button got updated by some other value or some other triggers in your application. So before submitting also, it's good to take a value of whatever you are pushing into your submit, so that you have a list of options or list of values that were selected when you were submitting the form, right? So this is more or less like a check, and it is good for you to print in the logs. Now the next thing we are doing here is, we are again, it's a good way to script where you want to have everything or all of your line of code into a particular try block, so that if it throws an exception, you are able to catch it and not fail the script entirely. Okay. So I'll just use the click command, because I know if I use this click command, it would throw me that it's not able to interact with that element, right? Because click isn't working directly. We have to use the label property. Now I'll keep this here itself. And the last one that I wanted to talk about is, so it's like simulating your business flow or your actual manual flow when you are validating a radio button. So when you come to the application, you open your application, you come here, and if you want to see whether if I want to click on this mail button, I'll come and click here. That helps me validate three things implicitly in the back of my mind, that I'm able to click it, this is editable, and this is not disabled, right? If I'm able to click it, it satisfies three conditions, right? But in your script, you have to have a check on these three conditions, right? How do you do that? So the first thing is, in your radios or the list of radios that we get, you have to first check whether the value of that particular is male or not, whether it is enabled or not. Then only you go ahead and click on that particular radio button. So in the similar line, what we did here is we checked the value for that particular male attribute. Then we checked whether that radio button is enabled or not. Then only we clicked on that particular that particular radio button's label. This is also one thing where we haven't talked about this, but this is one thing that you should know. Dot get attribute. So get attribute will return what? So consider this is the checkbox, and I'm going to inspect it. So whatever you see here inside this input, type, ID, name, value, right? So those things can be pulled back to Selenium using the get attribute value. So right now I am using ID. So ID would return me this gender male. Now if I use input type, it would return me radio. If I used the name, it would return me gender. Value means it will return me male. So you can just change it to whatever actual application value you want here. So a tag will have attribute, those attribute you can replace here and get that particular object. So right now what I'm doing here is, for this particular attribute or the radio button that is selected here, I cannot directly click on that radio button, right? So what I am doing is I am pulling back the ID value for this particular ID, and I am tweaking my code to use a CSS selector for, we understand it from here, right? We were trying to click, so here's always label for, and there is a ID for the actual radio button. So the similar concept, we built it here. We said label for, and from the runtime I just pulled the ID and I placed it here. Now if I do a label.click, so mail will get selected, right? Let's do it one clean run, and we should be good with radio buttons. All right, something is not working. Yes, what is not working? It says line 71. It says what is the exception it threw? It says no such element exception, right? Now why did this happen? Now this happened because I'm trying to click on lazy radio, right? Which is right now in itself disabled, right? So I should click on something which makes that particular area, or which scrolls to that particular area, right? So in my application, if I see right now, I'm trying to scroll to an area which is already not visible. So my script will not scroll to that page. Now an workaround to it would be, if I come here, right now it is loaded, right? So I'll say inspect, and this is the label. Now other thing is, I can come here and to this particular section, I can also do like this. So I'll use this ID instead of going and searching for these two objects, right? So I should be searching with something that is visible on the screen, right? So here I'll say this is my lazy section, right? So you go to the lazy section and scroll until the lazy section, then you click a label for lazy radio, right? Let's run this again. See, it came here, but it should have clicked on this radio button. It didn't click. Why? So where is the error? It's still here. What is the error this time? It says no such element exception. Let's do this is the error again. Label, right? So it came here, clicked on this radio button, and we are done. All right. So that's a wrap on handling the radio buttons in Selenium. So now you know how to select and interact with a radio button. Make sure you practice more on these things, because the more you practice, the more errors you'll encounter and more confidence you'll gain on how to approach these elements. So these are just some examples that I'm trying to run through. But in case if you feel I should cover something more on these, drop a comment and I'll make sure that I follow them. Don't forget to hit the like button. And if you know someone who is starting on his automation journey, make sure you tag them along. Make sure you tag them to this video. And I'll see you in the next one where we talk about checkboxes. Until then, keep learning and stay curious. Bye bye.